The second half of the day will be emceed by the Deputy Director of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, Ms. Kinshasha Holman Conwill. And as she makes her way out, we will begin the second half. Thank you all for your patience.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the second half of this wonderful program, Mascots, Myths, Monuments, and Memory, the collaboration of the National Museum of African American History and Culture and the National Museum of the American Indian. And greetings to all of you here in the Oprah Winfrey Theater and all of you watching on Facebook Live. During lunch, I learned that by then, over 13,000 people had logged in at least some point on Facebook Live to watch this, this wonderful presentation. And so we're very pleased, wherever you are, that you are hearing this wonderful set of discussions. And was not Ibram Kendi amazing? One more time for Ibram Kendi. Yes, yes. I fear that I may need to return to graduate school, but hey, there's still time. But it was brilliant. And the whole morning was brilliant. It was so great to hear from our leaders, my director, Lonnie Bunch, and Kevin Gover of the American Indian Museum, as well as our other colleagues who spoke. And you're in for another set of treats and tweets. I almost said tweets. Hashtag A Nation's Story. I am Kinshasha Holman Conwill, and I'm the Deputy Director of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And my job today is to introduce a fabulous person who some of you may know, who will add to this exciting presentation where artists, scholars, journalists are talking about these very trenchant issues about monuments and mascots. And that is Lene O'Neill. Miss O'Neill is the senior writer for ESPN's The Undefeated. She's on the faculty of Georgetown University, the continuing studies program for a master's in journalism. Additionally, she's the author of a memoir entitled I'm Every Woman, Remixed Stories of Marriage, Motherhood, and Work. She's a former Pulitzer Prize-nominated reporter for The Washington Post and a contributing editor to Essence magazine. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Lene O'Neill.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. That's all I can do without my reading glasses. All right, is that better? Can you hear me? I'm delighted to be here to discuss the politics of memory, the impact of 19th and 20th century racialized and oppressive monuments in the 21st century, and looking forward in this conversation to exploring a range of possible responses, including removing or recontextualizing memorials of the Confederate war heroes and the conquest of Native America, and other problematic public art and statuary. In a piece I wrote not long ago, I noted that in the oldest dirt argument, where supporters of Confederate monuments bathe themselves in Southern heritage but are innocent of its horrors, I am reminded of the words of James Baldwin in The Fire Next Time. It is the innocence which constitutes the crime, Baldwin noted. It is a crime that time and history will not forgive, that they have destroyed and are destroying hundreds of thousands of lives and do not know it and do not want to know it. They want to wave their flags and do in the streets what they could not do on the battlefield, destroy the country with ignorant refusals to evolve. That is the shame that continues to stain the sons and daughters of the Confederacy and continues to stain the nation on any given Saturday or Sunday as sports teams take the field, intent only on their interpretation of what's being fought for, what's being conveyed, and what is at stake in terms of identity. Our first panelist, Bree Newsome, grew up in Columbia, Maryland, and was drawn to the arts from a very young age. She became a filmmaker after being inspired by Disney musicals as a child and wanting to recreate that feeling of sitting in the theater after The Lion King and figure out how she could make that kind of magic. She became a filmmaker and grappled with social justice issues through her work. But she came to national prominence in July 2015 when she scaled the flag posts at the Columbia, South Carolina State House and removed the Confederate flag, whose symbolism was being reconsidered after 9 African-American worshipers were murdered by a young racist at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston. She continues her work as a community organizer, working with social justice groups in Charlotte, North Carolina. Please welcome Bree Newsome.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to the National Museum of African American History and the National Museum of the American Indian for hosting this event and having me be a part of it. Thank you so much to the organizers and volunteers who have made this event possible. I was actually invited to be here for the opening of the museum. This is my first opportunity to be here, but I was invited at the time that the museum opened, but was unable to attend at that time because at that same time, there was an uprising happening in my hometown of Charlotte, North Carolina, following the killing of Keith Lamont Scott by Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. And so I was reminded then, as I am also reminded now, that both of these museums really commemorate struggles that are still very much ongoing in this land. South Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union, arguing that, quote, "We of the South contend that slavery is right." Since the founding of the United States, the institution of slavery and the question of whether Africans could enjoy freedom in America had threatened to tear the nation in two. Finally, in 1860, after further compromise was impossible, the states went to war with each other, and the Confederacy was formed in the belief that African Americans should remain in a perpetual state of bondage. Despite recent attempts to revise history, the central issue of the Civil War was made clear by the statements of those who fought this war. And so the Confederate flag was first a symbol that represented slavery, and then after the South lost the war, it became emblematic of the Jim Crow laws that would govern the South for the next 100 years following the end of Reconstruction. Laws designed to restrict the economic and political power of the free Black population. Laws undergirded by a culture of racial terror whereby Blacks could be murdered simply for attempting to vote. Now, being a child of the South myself, it's true that I grew up in Columbia, Maryland, but I was born in Durham, North Carolina, and my father's family is from North Carolina, my mother's family is from South Carolina. Being a child of the South myself, the history and meaning of the Confederate flag and the social order it represents was never lost on me. I'm descended from the first freeborn child of Theodore and Minerva Diggs, who were both enslaved on a plantation in Rembert, South Carolina on the eve of the Civil War. It was there that, according to my third great-grandmother, Minerva, she prayed to God every night that her children would see freedom. She lived to see her children freed, but she also lived to see new limitations placed on their freedom. Like many Black families throughout the South, mine experienced the violence of Jim Crow segregation firsthand. My great-uncle, who was lynched in Goldsboro, North Carolina, so a white man could take his son's newspaper stand. My grandmother, who as a child in Greenville, South Carolina, witnessed the Ku Klux Klan drag her neighbor from his house and brutally beat him because he was a Black doctor who had provided treatment to a white woman. My great-aunt, who was forced to deliver her first child by herself without assistance because there was no colored hospital in St. Louis and the white nurses there refused to help her. And it was in this context of racism and violence that in 1961, at the height of Black student sit-in protest, South Carolina hoisted a Confederate flag above the dome of its state house as a statement of white supremacist power and a symbol of defiance against increasing pressure from the federal government to desegregate. As the 60s neared an end, segregation was outlawed with the passage of new civil rights legislation, yet the flag remained atop the dome of South Carolina's Capitol. The NAACP led a boycott of the state for several years, and the NCAA refused to host championship games there until the flag was removed, yet the flag remained. I was, of course, familiar with this flag growing up, spending summers in North Carolina and South Carolina, and I remember watching television in 2000 when, in a labored act of compromise on the part of the South Carolina legislature, the flag was moved from the dome of the Capitol, where it was originally raised in 1961, to the lawn. And at that time, the state of South Carolina built a 4-foot-tall spoked fence around the flag to protect it. And they also passed a law requiring a 2/3 majority vote in the state house in order for the flag to be lowered for any reason. Civil rights groups continued to boycott, demanding that the flag be removed entirely, as did many businesses. But the South Carolina legislature and the governor, Nikki Haley, supported the flag remaining in place. And so it was when, in June 2015, a white supremacist traveled from the Capitol in Columbia, South Carolina, to Charleston, where he entered a historically black church and murdered 9 black parishioners during a prayer meeting at Mother Emanuel AME. This type of violence is not unprecedented, of course. It's rooted in a long history of black churches being targeted by white supremacists because these churches are hubs of black community organization and because of the role black churches have played in the ongoing civil rights movement. Dylann Roof targeted Mother Emanuel specifically for this reason. Those murdered in Mother Emanuel that night included Cynthia Hurd, Susie Jackson, Ethel Lance, DePayne Middleton Doctor, Tawanza Sanders, Daniel Simmons, Sharonda Coleman Singleton, Myra Thompson, and Clementa Pinckney, pastor of Emanuel AME, who was also a state representative. In his role as state representative, merely days before being gunned down in his own church, Pinckney had succeeded in getting body cam legislation passed in response to the Walter Scott case. Just briefly, for anyone who's not familiar with this case, it was, again, in headlines recently because the officer involved in the case, former officer Michael Slager, was convicted on federal civil rights violations. But just quickly, this was a case in North Charleston. A passerby just happened to be walking by and was able to capture on cell phone video footage of Michael Slager shooting and killing Walter Scott in the back as he was running away, then walking up to his body and planting evidence. Well, to give you a sense of the climate in Charleston, if you're not already aware, the person who witnessed and recorded this did not feel safe going to the police with what they had witnessed and instead went to an attorney. And together with his attorney, they released the footage to the media. It's important to recognize that what happened in Charleston in 2015, it falls on a recent historical timeline of mass shootings in this country. Of course, we are dealing with gun violence in this nation. But it also belongs, as I said, in a much longer history of attacks on black churches and civil rights workers. The United States and South Carolina flags were lowered to half-staff. Yet because of the law passed in 2000, the Confederate flag remained high and fully unfurled even as Clementa Pinckney's casket was processed through the streets of the state capitol. I watched all of these events unfold from Charlotte, North Carolina, an hour north of Columbia, South Carolina, where I live and work as an artist and community organizer. I gathered with a group of 9 activists in Charlotte, and we decided to remove the flag immediately, both as an act of civil disobedience against a racist and unjust law, and as a demonstration of the power people have when we work together. We couldn't wait for South Carolina to do the right thing. We had been waiting for South Carolina to do the right thing regarding racial equity and justice for over 100 years. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. penned a letter while jailed in Birmingham and explained the need for nonviolent direct action to, quote, create such a crisis and establish such creative tensions that a community that has consistently refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. That was our goal with this action. By removing the flag, we would force the state of South Carolina into a moral crisis of having to decide whether to leave the flag down or to raise it back up again. Taking down the flag would require many roles, including someone who must scale to the top and remove the flag. The first consideration was who could physically perform the climb, who could also put themselves at risk of being arrested. That narrowed it down to about 3 of us. And of those 3, I was the only person of color. We were all women, and I was the only person of color. And of course, we recognized the powerful visual image of seeing a black woman take down the Confederate flag in South Carolina. So we thought through more of what we wanted to communicate visually with this action, and that's how we came to the collective decision that it should be a white man, James Tyson, who would help me over the fence surrounding the flagpole, who would stand guard as I climbed, and who would volunteer to be arrested alongside me in a demonstration of solidarity. If you have seen any of the photos or video footage of the flag removal, you might have noticed that James is holding on to the pole the whole time that I'm climbing and when I come down, and he's doing that because as I neared the top and prepared to remove the flag, the police at the bottom threatened to tase me. They trained their tasers on me and were preparing to shoot me full of electricity. And of course, being attached to a metal pole, there's a possibility that that could have electrocuted me. And that's when James grabbed the pole and refused to let go, and he said to them, if you electrocute her, you will have to electrocute me too. History will rightly remember him alongside the many white allies who over the centuries have risked their own lives and in some cases spilled their own blood for the cause of racial justice and liberation. From the case of Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner, who were murdered in Philadelphia, Mississippi by Ku Klux Klan and the police, to Heather Heyer, who lost her life when she was plowed down with a car by a white supremacist in Charlottesville, Virginia. And it was with the awareness of all of this history that we chose to attack a symbol of systemic racism with an action that symbolized its dismantling. For us, it was not and has never been simply about a flag, but rather it is about abolishing the spirit of hatred and oppression in all its forms. It is about ending slavery and genocide in all its forms. I've been praised a lot for my courage, but I want to point out that courage is not about the absence of fear, but rather the belief in something greater than that fear and the determination to fight for it. I faced tremendous fear when I volunteered to scale the flagpole in Columbia, South Carolina. I prayed before making the decision to do it, and while praying, I thought of all the freedom fighters of the past. I thought of the sacrifice they made for me to enjoy the rights I have today. I thought of the courage it took for them to do what they did in the times in which they lived. I knew there was risk involved in what I was doing. I knew there was reason to fear what might happen. Yet I also understand that as a human being, the measure of my humanity is linked to my ability to recognize the humanity of others. And I knew that in that moment I had become part of something so much greater than myself, and that is the universal struggle of humanity toward a society that is truly free and that truly recognizes the rights of all individuals. That is the cause that I risked my life for that day and that I continue to fight for. The state of South Carolina raised the flag again in the immediate aftermath of my removing it. But facing increasing pressure and backlash for re-raising it, the state officially lowered the flag a final time a few days later. What we did in South Carolina is perhaps mainly a symbolic action, and then perhaps it's as powerful as a symbolic action can be. We challenged an old image of slavery and segregation and created a new image of liberation. The fact is, however, that symbols themselves don't make reality what it is. The flag flew for 54 years over the South Carolina State House, but the simple fact of the flag flying there isn't what kept Black Americans oppressed. The flag symbolized the oppression, but the oppression itself is the result of racist policies and social practices that continue to this day. And so therefore, to make real change, We must not only remove the symbols of racism, but also the policies and social practices that perpetuate racial disparity. Similarly, we can construct 1,000 monuments to freedom and democracy, but until these ideals become reality, all we have is dreams made of fabric, metal, and stone. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you again to Bree Newsome.